Welcome to the Sync podcast, where we explore the value of an inclusive approach in the way we think, work, and engage with our communities and workplaces. We show that the meaning of inclusion, contrary to what many may believe, is about leaving no one behind. Each episode features candid conversations with thought leaders and change makers driving inclusive initiatives across various sectors. Our goal is to create a community of inclusive-minded individuals and organizations committed to collective and sustainable impact. I'm your host, Nicole Piggott, and our guest today is Sheryl Johnson, Chief Storyteller and Jedi Strategist. With 25 plus years in strategic marketing, Sheryl has shaped inclusive narratives for brands like Intuit, Kellogg, Kraft, Kids Help Phone, and Manulife. Now leading strategic insight marketing and working with AndHumanity, she helps purpose-driven organizations tell stories that build trust, belonging, and impact. Welcome, Sheryl. So I want to welcome you, Sheryl, to the Sync podcast. I've been really looking forward to this conversation with you because you and I have had many a conversation about what it's like to move through the echelons of the corporate world, being someone from an underrepresented group, and particularly being a Black woman in a space that's not necessarily designed for Black women to advance. And we've had lots of conversations about what it means, what you've had to overcome. And I think it's important to share with some of our audience so that they can benefit from our experience. So we're pretty cash here at the Sync podcast. And so I want us to be a fairly free-flowing conversation, but let's start with going back in the Wayback Machine. And let's learn a little bit about who you are. I know who you are, but I'd love my audience to know who you are. And a little, talk to us about your incredible career. Like, you've moved through major companies in the corporate world to go on to starting your own marketing firm, Strategic Insight Marketing, and working with AndHumanity. And you've really made sort of one of these shifts that we've made, both of us have made in this space, like from doing, our professional work in the marketing world, and then, or in the professional world, and then merging that with EDI and how that has played a role in shaping who you are.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. And yes, it feels like this is now recording conversations that we have had many, many times over the few years that we've been working together and that we've known each other. My journey began as a dark-skinned Black girl, daughter to two powerful, wise, Bayesian immigrant parents, older sister to the smartest, most fierce and courageous woman I know. We grew up in Scarborough. I didn't even know that I was a dark-skinned anything until the day I was playing outside of my house and a little white boy threw a rock at me and called me nigger.
Mm-hmm.
At 4 years old, I still remember that day. Didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it meant, but it was said with such venom that I knew it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
As I grew up in a two-parent household, we owned our own house, we had two cars, and to the point where my sister and I went to some of the best schools in university or in Canada. And yet, whether I was buying my first car, negotiating my mortgage at 25, or leading a cross-functional team, in many ways, I was reminded that I was less than.
Mm-hmm.
Exceptional, well-spoken, not good enough, that I spoke funny. I guess I have a Toronto accent. But throughout my years on this planet, coping with not being the norm or the default in Canada informs how I move through the world.
Wow. You've triggered a number of thoughts for me. I just want to sort of share with you, with the audience, some things that Sheryl and I share. First of all, we're both the daughters of incredible Bajan. I have a Bajan parent. She has two Bajan parents. And for those of you who don't know, Bajan are people who hail from Barbados, which is an incredible island that is actually led by an incredible woman leader
Mm.
who is a trailblazer and absolutely a force to be reckoned with on the leadership front. So please do your homework and look it up. But Mia Motley. Um, but when you talked about the first time you heard the N word, the first time you were called that, it brought to mind, I had chills because I remember the first time I was called that. And I think every Black person can remember the first time they were called that. And as a child, how your world sort of shifts. That safe space that a child is for everyone or for most kids, all of a sudden your safety is just shaken, and you're redefining the world that you thought you occupied. It's just all of a sudden not that world. And so when you said that, it really brought back those memories of that moment where I sort of thought, oh, okay. And the irony is, it's often with kids that you played with or who played in your entourage that all of a sudden they're throwing this back. And so, lesson number one for those of you who are listening, and I talk about this in workshops that I give, the way you raise your kids and the things you say, and the things that you do speak much more volumes than the things that you say. So you'll tell your kids, "Oh, you treat everybody the way you want to be treated. You live by the golden rule." All of these things that we'll tell our kids, but they'll see the way you behave. And these kids don't come up with this stuff on their own. They are emulating the things that they see, and it has profound impacts on other children around them. So listen, we're two women who are not in our 20s who we can still vividly remember when that happened. So that's what, lesson to parents. Think about the way you behave in front of your kids and the lessons you are teaching your children and the impact it has on other children. So thanks so much, Sheryl, because that was really raw and honest. And that's, folks, that's the kind of conversation we're going to have today.
Well, I also think that the when we think about our journeys and where, this conversation starts, it does start with that, I'll call it the demarcation point. The point, no Black child grows up or is born, I'm Black, I'm different. No child grows up, I'm white, I'm the default, you're taught that.
Yep.
And whether it's taught as a positive or a negative. And then when you grow up in a household, and I mentioned my parents because I did not get here on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went home and I was crying, I didn't even know what I was crying about. I just knew that that word was bad. And the way that it was thrown at me was negative. And I still remember my mom's response to that. And that changed. I don't think it changed everything for me, but it basically didn't allow me to go down that path of, oh, I guess I am less than. I guess I am this thing that I was just called. My mother said to me, and she still says it to me today, you are not what they say you are. You are who you are.
Wow.
I'll never forget that. And she still says it to me. I'm, like you said, we're not in our 20s anymore. And I'm blessed to still have my mother. And she still says that. So I would also say to your listeners, you have the ability and you have the power to be able to shift that narrative for your child
Yes.
and to ensure that what they say about you is not who you are. And that will be what you carry throughout your entire life, whether you're in leadership, whether you are in school, whether you are leading a small group, a large group, or whether or not you are, basically just in a group of friends. You are
So
not what they
true.
say you are.
So the power, second lesson, folks, like the power we have as parents to shape the impact of the world on our kids. Like we like to act like we're impotent and we can't control all those things that are happening out there. But that moment was so crucial to you, like the way your mother handled, and I bet you she didn't even consciously know how, I think she did probably know how important it was that she handled that moment. I too have a similar reaction. My mother was a lioness. I still refer to her as a lioness. Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore, but my girls would still remember her as a lioness. And I felt that warm hug of safety that my mother was, and that she would fight for me and break down barriers for me and make sure that the world, that I was able to achieve my full potential and that no way that anything was going to stand in my way. And I really felt that in that moment as well. So yes, as parents, our reaction is important, and how we handle that is important. And I encourage people of underrepresented, parents of underrepresented groups, of kids from underrepresented groups, to take the time to prepare for that moment, because the moment's
Mhm.
coming if it hasn't come already. It will come. And it may even come that they come to you when they're not children anymore and they're finally confronted with that moment, or made aware, or become aware of that moment, and need that sense of security. So let's shift gears here, because we've both been leaders in the corporate world.
Mhm.
And we all know, if we're going to be really honest with ourselves, that when we know what the world considers to be the image of a leader, it doesn't look anything like the two women you have in front of you right now. So it's usually white. It's usually someone who is a heterosexual, usually a man, and cisgendered. So that's the default of the image of being a leader. And so those are some of the hurdles that we have to confront if we're going to penetrate that leadership space. But we've also gotten these push and pull narratives that surround what needs to happen in order to create space for people who don't fit that profile of leadership. And one sort of school of thought, and I've had debates with my friends in this space about, how do you gain the skills to better navigate that world? So how do you adapt? How do become someone who can play in that space, but nothing about that space changing? That space needs to stay the way it is, and you just get the skills so that you can better navigate that space. So that's one sort of school of thought. And then the other school of thought is, what needs to be different so that you can actually bring people into that space and actually allow them to be their best selves in that space, and actually benefit from the value of difference brings to the workplace. Like, I mean, if we're all going to just look different but behave exactly the same way, do we really gain the benefits of diversity? So what are your thoughts on this? Like, because I know you and I have had chats about this.
You know what, Nicole? It is unfortunate.
Mm.
We exist in a culture that requires this to be an important topic in 2025. Leadership, in my opinion, is about inspiring others, building and nurturing talent, engaging those around us to achieve incredible professional and personal goals. To answer these questions, a Black woman leader, perhaps head of HR, perhaps corporate DEI, social services, or perhaps education, is well accepted. And perhaps leadership is not as questioned, still questioned, but not as questioned, because it's where they fit.
Hmm.
But if they were the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, a president of an Ivy League school, or a pilot or a surgeon, the latest quip is that they are a DEI hire. But why? Because white, cisgender, heterosexual men are seen as the default.
Yep.
And everyone else doesn't really belong. System change needs to happen to change the default. Challenge the assumption that everyone is surprised to see a woman of color as the CEO of Pepsi. Equity
Mhm.
deserving communities will continue to be seen as outliers until the default is no longer the default. So is there an answer towards, do you change yourself? Do you change the system? How do you work within a system that sees you as another? It really, the challenge here is that we have to keep pushing to ensure that we are changing that default. That when we say leader, that what comes to mind of those young people coming up through university right now, those young people in preschool, that when you show different experiments and examples and you show little boys and girls and you ask them, what does a pilot look like? Their picture of a pilot is different. It
Yes.
is a woman. It can be a person of color. It can be anything. It can be anyone. So working within a system right now that has this default, you will always be pushing against the other. You will always
Yeah.
be pushing against, do you belong here? And then because that is the default of where we are right now, in order to continue to move forward, yes, we have to find ways to work within a system that sees us as other
You're
until
it,
that system changes.
that is such a profound comment because what I'm hearing from you is there's almost a duality of in this moment we're living in sort of a duality or a paradoxical sort of situation because you're right. I am a profound believer that you can only change from within. The best way to change is from within. If I'm sitting
Mhm.
on the sidelines yelling at you about let me in, you should need to do this to let me, I just don't have the power to change. But when I'm in the inside, it's harder to ignore
Mhm.
me. And in order to get inside, you're right,
Yeah,
you need to navigate and work within the systems that currently exist in order to change those systems. But you need to be mindful that the goal needs to remain, that the systems do need to change.
that's
So it's
right.
yes, get in, work to navigate to get into those systems, but then how do we adapt and change those systems? The few things came to mind as you were speaking. One of them that I talk about a lot with folks and in the workshops that we do is around we also, and I remember even talking to my mom, who was a trailblazer. She moved to the senior levels of organizations at the World Bank and the IMF, at the Bank of Montreal. And we also can be guilty of normalizing the default. And because the default has been the default for so long, knowing what can be different, even knowing ourselves well enough to know what parts of yourselves are not real, are really you just normalizing something that doesn't really fit, but I've just made it fit and I've gotten so adept at making it fit that it's almost become, you know, rote. And so we have
Yeah,
to be a lot more aware and mindful of the things that we have normalized
yeah,
to adapt to the default. And then the second thing is the goal also needs to be that we are disrupting systems in a positive way that lets everybody in. So there's no sense that
mhm,
it's disrupting to only adapt to one group or to certain groups, but it's really so that everyone feels that there's a space for them within the workplace. And it's work to do that. So
and
it's an
that
interesting
system
challenge.
change.
Yeah, that
That is
system
system,
change.
it's
Yes.
policy change. It's, when
Culture.
people, culture, when people talk about talk about DEI in a negative state where it seems like there's a perspective that it favors. It's
Yeah,
not about favoring, it's about opening.
exactly.
It's opening the doors because there are those who believe, well, the doors are open. You can apply if you'd like. Go ahead, apply. But if nobody of color is at the leadership level, I think that suggests that you're not ready for that. Does it? Or does it actually mean that the door is not even invisible, but it is closed? to some folks.
Yes.
And so DEI is really about opening all the doors, opening the doors to change the system.
And it is much in your head as that candidate as in the person who is considering you. So opening the doors for us in our heads, that's a possibility for me. And that requires
Mhm.
people to be able to see people like them in those roles. Otherwise, they just don't see themselves in those
Right,
spaces. And then
exactly.
it requires you to open your mind to, am I really open-minded? Am I really considering the capabilities of this person? Or are there biases that are influencing the way I'm perceiving that individual?
And
So
hence
actually,
the biases create those closed doors.
absolutely.
And
And the thing is,
people don't necessarily see that. They're like, no, the doors are open, the doors
it,
are open.
the amount of
But what
people that
school did you go to? Well, what school did you go to?
or what
Right?
clubs do you belong to? Or do you golf? Or do you play? It's so funny
Exactly.
because the amount of people who say to me, I look at the qualities and the competencies of the individual, and I'll say, listen, are you a robot? Because unless you're a robot, nobody just looks at competencies and qualities of the individual. The first of all, the world qualities is riddled with bias. What is quality to you versus quality to another? Competencies, how many times do you look at a competency that you think that that person should have because of who they are versus a competency that that you don't think is necessary because you don't really
Mhm.
see that competency being ascribed to a woman, etc. So I've had people who said, "Oh, you're too direct." Have you ever told my colleagues, my male colleagues, they're too direct? Never. But all of a sudden, Nick's too direct. You cut to the chase too much.
Mhm.
So it leads me to my next question because you're actually the one just for those who don't know me, I did most of my education in French. So I sometimes there's words in English that I'm less familiar with. So Cheryl has been part of my education, of my lexicon in the EDI space. And she's the one who introduced me to the term code switching.
Mhm.
And it was like an aha moment for me because it put a label on things that I did even unconsciously to fit into that first scenario that we talked about, that default, to fit into the default. So, talk a little bit about what code switching is. And as a Black professional or anyone from a marginalized group that's trying to navigate this dominant system, what it means for us emotionally, what it means for us professionally,
Mhm.
the constant self monitoring. Share with us.
This is one of my favorite
Yes.
topics. So it is heavy lifting, I
Yeah.
will say, but it's interesting living in this space. Many of us don't even recognize we're doing it. Here's an example. I speak to my sister every day, every morning on her way into work. She's in the car. Um, I work from home, so I'm at my desk. So we talk every single morning, and it's just us talking. Her husband isn't there, the kids aren't there. It's just us talking. So the other day, she was walking into her office, and instantly she ran into somebody that from the office, and instantly her voice tone changed, her
Ooh.
laugh changed, her words changed. And when she came back, I was laughing so hard. She asked, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "You code switched so quickly. It was like a light switch." And her response was, "Really? I didn't even notice." That is the professional stance we all take. But when we're among our communities, the laughter is deeper, the language is warmer, and it's all familiar. Not sure we even know we're doing it anymore, because living in an environment, in a culture, in a society where you walk onto the bus, oh, hello, hi, hello, how's everybody doing? When you run into somebody from your community, hey, you do the dap, you do the head shake, you do the things that just come naturally. So this idea of code switching living in Canada, living in our culture and in our society, you learn as a child what's appropriate, what language is appropriate, what body language is appropriate through school. When you get home, you shed all of that. When you're in amongst your friends in your community, you shed all of that. But I think we do it now so unconsciously that when we get home, we are exhausted
Yeah, it is exhausting.
and we don't know why. Why are why am I so exhausted? Like, I'm fine. I had an 8-hour day, I had a 12-hour day, everybody has their days. Why is it exhausting? We're doing it to fit in because as soon as a word slips out, you can see it in the eyes of those around you. If they're not from your community, not from your culture, what did you just say? Did that just slip out? So you learn that it's kind of the way West Indian mothers sometimes say, it's like, I'm not one of your little friends.
Yeah.
The way that you operate outside of the home and the way that you operate inside the home, the way that you operate with that warmth and familiarity is not the way you operate in the office. It's not the way that you operate. And you learn that and it becomes innate and it's that light switch. And I laugh so hard because my sister who works in an office, she's a leader in her space. She didn't even realize she was doing it.
Well, that's the thing that a lot of people probably don't realize. That we have a term in our family that we call it house business. Like that's house business. And house business means that's not for public consumption. That stays in the vault at home and it's not for everyone to hear. And that's kind of what code switching is. But
Mhm.
so a few things came to mind to me when you were talking. You and I have talked about the torture we went through as kids getting our hair straightened because the default for professional appropriate hair in our society is straight hair.
Yep.
And the result is that, and for those of you who don't know, it's an education for some of our listeners who are not from the Black community, um, and who didn't grow up in the Black community in the 70s. Um, a lot of us grew up with literal poison being put on our heads, and we have cancer cases as a result. There's class action lawsuits against these manufacturers of straight hair straightening products because they were filled with lye and they were literally poisoning us. And I used to have like burn marks in my head. I would have like literally sores as a result. I would dread the days it was like you knew it was coming up because your hair was getting kinkier, it was getting back to its usual texture, and you knew that the day was coming soon when you were going to have to get your hair straightened. And the day I decided to wear my natural hair at work and let my hair grow out and wear my natural hair, I'm sure a lot of you think, what the heck? You have to think about that? It was a big decision. It was a cataclysmic big decision I agonized over before I finally decided to do it. And make no mistake, I did it when I was in the senior levels of an organization. I was a VP. I was relatively safe and I was the one who was making the rules. So I could decide that I was going to let my hair grow out. But, I remember my mother straightening my hair. Everyone had straight hair. My mother is Scottish and her hair was relatively straight. But I remember the whole process of straightening hair. So straightening hair is one of those things. I also remember growing up and getting into the workplace. And the first day I met my mother after work and I was wearing pants. And my mother said, "Ooh, we're casual today." So for you guys who, think wearing pants, you don't, I mean, you're stuck with your uniform too, because you've got to wear your suits and your pants to work also. But wearing pants, there was a time when it was pretty radical for you to be going to work in pants. I worked in the financial industry and we all wore suits, and those suits were skirt suits. They weren't pantsuits. And it was a big deal when you were wearing pants. So that's another code switching thing that we as women had to do in order to fit into the workplace. So it is exhausting. It is exhausting. And there's a part of you that feels a bit like we talk about imposter syndrome, but we often talk about imposter syndrome when we shouldn't be feeling like an imposter. But in the situation of code switching, we actually are imposters. We're
Mm.
not being ourselves. We are fitting your narrative and this, this is so pernicious that the skin bleaching industry in the
Mm.
southern hemisphere is rampant. There are so many countries where people are dying because they're bleaching their skin to fit into that narrative of what the default is. So that's how dangerous and how deep seated code switching is. But it is exhausting. And thanks for teaching me the term.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, I think it comes back to, naming things, right? Like
Yeah.
basically it is something that we all went through. We all had that common experience, but what's the
Hmm.
term? And once you put a term on it, it's like, oh, that's what it is. I went through that too, or I still feel that. I wanted to just touch on the suit and the clothing for a moment, um, because in very recent media, um, the idea of the power, I'll call it the power of the suit and the power of clothing, um, because it is about code switching, but it's also telegraphically telling others around you, do you belong or don't you belong?
Yeah.
And so, again, I'm sure I'm not saying anything that your listeners are not already aware of, but when President Zelensky went to the White
Mm,
House
perfect example.
and he was basically berated. If you didn't see, if you just saw what happened in the White House, take a look at what happened before they got into the Oval Office. The first thing 47 said, "Oh, you dressed up for us today."
Exactly.
So the president of a country who is literally in a war, fighting for his country, shows up and he's not wearing a suit because he's not pretending to be anything other than who he is. But that automatically triggered to the power brokers around him, you're other,
And you're not
you're
showing
less than,
deference to our
you're not
station.
part of us.
How
You're not
dare
part of
you
us.
come in here in,
Yeah.
your clothes? How dare you be yourself? How dare you be yourself was the message.
And yet the special employee who shows up with chainsaws can show up in a sweatshirt, can show up in a baseball hat. That's fine.
And with a kid
That
on his
is
shoulders.
power.
Mhm,
That is
mhm.
power. So the idea of wearing a suit or not wearing a suit depends on who it is and
Yes,
who holds
yes,
power. So code switching is important only because it helps us better understand that. And I say it's important only because if you, in the world of power dynamics, to fit in, you code switch.
yes.
To be yourself is seen as being a rebel because you're not code switching. You're showing up in sweatshirt, in
And
a
it's
in a
a
baseball hat.
privilege, Cheryl, of power.
Oh my
I
goodness.
felt
Yes,
I could have my natural hair when I was in a position of
you're absolutely
power.
right.
I would never have contemplated it when I was in a more junior role. So you speak to a really important point is that
Mhm.
look around you, and I guarantee you that a lot of people that are in your sphere
Mhm.
in the more junior roles are not feeling, or if you're doing a great job as a leader, they are feeling that they can be their authentic selves. But ask
Right.
yourself, do people look, is there a de facto uniform in this office? Is there
Mhm.
you know, a a
Mhm.
pressure to fit into a mold?
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
really, it's a really, really telling comment and a great example. And so you and I have also talked about, in the context of code switching, the microaggressions that we all experience as we move up the echelons and as we navigate, frankly, society, but also the corporate world. And the danger also of normalizing those microaggressions, like it's just the way things are, people say those things and we just sort of, endure. But let's
Mhm,
help the audience to understand what a microaggression is and the
mhm,
impact it's had on you and
mhm.
can have on others.
Yeah, yeah. So, a microaggression. Before there was a term for it, I called them pokes. So, an example of that, and I would say up until maybe 5, 6 years ago, I still heard, "You're so well spoken.
Mm,
Where are you from? What school did you go to?" How I addressed those pokes in the past and how I address them now, very different. The uncomfortable by putting others at ease, by chuckling, it's like, "Oh, thank you. You're so well spoken. Oh, thank you." While clenching my teeth.
yeah.
And now what I say is, "You're so well spoken. What did you mean by that? Why are you asking?" As we mature as social beings, we can respond in parallel and not under interrogation. And I
Hmm.
consider it interrogation. Again, this is a level of power. The concept of "you're so well spoken," relative to what? Relative to who? What are you comparing the way that I speak to?
The subtext is, I didn't expect you to be that well spoken.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's not
yeah,
you're well
yeah,
spoken, period. It's
right.
I didn't expect you to be that well spoken. And even if that's not what you think you intended or that you legitimately intended, given the world that Cheryl and I navigate, that's often the subtext that we're dealing with. So that's how it lands.
And the same as "where are you from?"
Yeah. Oh
I
gosh.
mean, the underlying is that you're not white, therefore you're not from here.
Hmm.
You've come from someplace else.
Yep.
So again, my response before would have been, "Oh no, I was born and raised in Toronto. I'm Canadian." But where are you really from?
Oh, oh gosh.
Now
Yes.
my question is, again, in parallel, because it's, to me, I still feel that's interrogation.
Hmm. Hmm.
You speak well, you must be from someplace. How did you learn to speak so well? Da, 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 da. So now it's, why do you ask? I'm not being rude. You may have a very legitimate question to ask, and that's absolutely fine. But I want to now, and open the door to a broader conversation, which
Right.
is, I'm challenging your default thinking
Exactly.
that the way I speak or where I'm from surprises you.
Yes.
So I want to ask the question, why are you asking? Because then you're forced to think about, why am I asking?
Yeah.
You look different, so you must be from. Nobody's ever going to say that, but
But
it's
you are going
charging
to get them
them.
thinking about,
That's the that's
yes,
where the maturity in
yes.
social maturity happens, where you get to hear it so often. It's like, oh my God, I am not going to answer this question again. But I'm also advancing the culture and language and default belief that, why can't I be from Canada? Why
Yes.
can't I speak with a Toronto accent? I travel around the world and people, quite frankly, have asked me if I'm from Chicago, of
Oh,
all
I get
places.
everything. Yeah.
Chicago. Okay, sure. But also around the world.
Or I get told I don't have an accent.
Yeah.
What do you mean I don't have an
You just,
accent? There's no such
what does
thing.
that even mean? What does that even mean? But even that around the world, it's challenging the fact that they're Black Canadians.
Oh, yeah.
I would assume you're from the US, or you're in a business, so I guess you're
Hmm.
from the US. No, there are people of color in Canada. And I don't even know if 47 knows that. But anyways, that's a
But
whole
it's
other
funny you
topic.
should say that. You feel like saying, this is Canada. I know you
Yeah,
think what you look like is Canada, but
yeah,
this is Canada too. And
yeah,
that's sort of the message that
yeah.
people need to get. My sister gets very frustrated by that because she was born in London, Ontario, and she gets asked that. And like, and people, when you keep asking, where are you really from? Where are your parents from?
Mhm.
Do you want us to just tell you what you want to hear? Do you want to hear our antecedents? Is
Yeah.
that now my father speaks a number of indigenous languages. Sometimes he busts out in Ojibwa. And,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, all of us are settlers here, with the exception of indigenous communities. And
100%.
so kindly sit down and recognize that this is Canada, that is Canada, that
That's right.
Canada is a mosaic, as is the US. Just a little note to you all. You're all a mosaic as well. You too, UK, and everywhere else, most everywhere else in the world.
Mm.
So, yeah, those are microaggressions. Those are the things that we deal with that actually can be very damaging and frustrating. You almost hold your breath waiting for it. You know when it's coming. You can see the lead in that the person's going to ask the question. And I know they think they're super original, but you've had that question 500 times. Like it's the question that you get, like, are you, your education, you were raised, your parents raised you really well. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Of
Yeah.
course, my parents raised me well. Anyone who knows a West Indian parent, I could tell you they're still calling their parents ma'am and sir. So we don't have
Yeah.
issues with how we raise our kids in the West Indies. So, so we've talked about the politicization of hair and what's considered professional hair. And I actually had an assistant who worked for a major company here in Canada, and she was going on her first business trip to Toronto. And her boss said to her, and she had braids in her hair, and her boss said to her, "So are you gonna, before you go to Toronto, are you gonna do something about your hair?" Which, of course, is a both a microaggression and encouraging code switching. And so I talked about my natural hair and the challenges and the big soul searching I had to do before I switched. So, and I've also had, just I'll finish on one other note. I had a client who, I saw her and she had beautiful twists in her hair. And anyone who knows what twists are, like, it's where Black women will twist their hair into sort of ringlets. And she had twists in her hair. And I said, "Oh, your hair is gorgeous." And she normally wore a wig. And I said, "Why don't you wear your hair like this more often?" She said, "Oh, I'll wear that with you, but they're not ready for that at work. Like, I can't wear this to work." And she works for a crown corporation. So Black women's natural hair is associated with unprofessional hair. Talk a little bit about that.
The Crown Act in the US.
Yes, perfect.
For those of you who are listening who might be thinking, well, just wear your hair any way that you want. Who's telling you to change your hair? Society and culture has told us to change our hair. The Crown Act, and please do your research on this one. I'm not the legal expert on it, but what I can tell you is that they had to enact an actual law to prevent organizations from discriminating against Black women for wearing their natural hair, the hair that grows out of their head.
Yes.
So the way that your hair comes out of your head was grounds for you not getting a job. And when you do look up the Crown Act in the US, take a look at the date
Yeah.
of when that Crown
Yes.
Act, it's not the 1960s, it's not even the
70s.
1970s, it's not even the
Nope.
1980s. I'll tell you, it's not even the
Nope.
1990s. So policing Black people's hair is a part of the power structure. It is a part of, do you belong or don't you belong?
Mhm.
So if I'm going to accept you in a leadership role, you got to straighten your hair.
Yep.
or your hair has to be perceived as straightened, hence the wigs, hence the weaves,
Mm-hmm.
hence the, and for every little Black girl who grew up in a Black household, because your mothers were told that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're helping to prepare you
You for the world.
for life outside this house. If I were to, pull down your ear,
Uh,
right? So again, that is something in our culture that almost every Black girl, without me explaining, will
mm-hmm.
understand. Or the pulling down your ear, and
Yep, the cringe.
that's
And
the
then,
hot
and hold
comb.
still, hold still.
Literally, for those who are not aware, before you could chemicalize your
Mm-hmm.
child's hair because they were too young, what was absolutely acceptable was to put a hot comb,
Iron
literally,
comb.
it is
Mm-hmm.
a hot iron comb, on the element of the stove till it was red hot, and then take your daughter, usually it's your daughter's hair before the age of 13, because usually that's when parents basically said, okay, you can put the poisons in your hair, but until then, we're going to straighten your hair this way. And guess what? Our mothers were not stylists. So every now and then you would literally get burnt.
Yep.
And because it was part of our culture to straighten your hair, shh,
Oh
hush,
yeah. No one wanted to hear you
hush. And you can
fussing.
hear
Yeah.
your
The
hair
sizzling.
sizzling. You can hear the smell. You can smell like all of this. If you're from a Black household, it's like, this is bringing back
Burnt hair.
memories.
Yep.
But why? Why did we go through all of this? Our mothers were not trying to punish us.
No, or
This was not
torture us
punishment.
or no.
They were literally trying to prepare us for the world outside of those doors.
They were trying to give us the best chance to succeed in the world outside of those doors. And part of that was sitting there in a torture chamber to have your hair pressed. And
Yes,
you literally were the amount of times, and they'd hold the minute you knew they were holding the ear down, you were like,
because
oh,
they were
here we
getting it.
go. Here we
Yeah,
go. And
yeah.
in like no kid grew up without at least being burned once. But burned once, you were lucky because most of us were burned plenty of
Several times.
times. Okay, plenty of times in one pressing.
Yeah.
And think, you got your hair pressed at least once a week. So
Yes. I
that
was just gonna
was once
say
a week. Like
once a
you knew
week.
it was coming up on a Saturday or a Sunday before you started school,
Church or
and
a church, yeah.
you would get ready. You'd be outside playing and you'd be hiding, like, don't let them know where I'm playing so that I don't get called in to come get my hair pressed. So yeah, that's part of the Black experience. So
And
true.
then
It's
you
like
would, I still remember my grandmother screaming at me because I had the gall to play after church.
oh,
And so my
after
hair
your
was
hair been,
straightened
so you were
and
sweating.
then
Oh no,
sweating. And
girl.
how dare you play? Because now I
No.
have to do your hair again before you go to school.
Exactly. No, 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 no. You weren't allowed to move. The hair had to stay perfect for Monday. Oh my gosh. Well, Cheryl, this has been
So yeah.
such a hoot. But before we close, we always ask this one question of our participants, our guests. How do you make sure that in who you are today in the professional work that you do, how do you make sure that the work you do is aligned with your values, that you're delivering that impact, and that you're living your truth in the work that you do now?
Mm. I love this question, Nicole, and I appreciate you asking this. I had to think about this one a little bit more. But you know what? I'm going to answer that by a simple term that I have started to recognize and practice every single day, and that is giving space.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that rapid fire answer response, demanding attention is not aligned with my values.
Mm-hmm.
It is something we grew up with through corporate that, you're being asked a question, you better have the answer. You better have all your binders ready to answer right away. If you're, on virtual, it's like, oh, somebody asked me a question, I better be able to respond right away. I've learned to be comfortable with silence.
I
I've
love it.
learned to be comfortable with a pause, leaving space for responses or concluding discussions to be picked up at another time. Speed is no longer my currency. Accuracy and thoughtfulness is.
Mm. So really I love that because the humbleness it takes to be able to say, I'm just going to, I don't have the answers. And I could tell you folks, if we did, we would not be in the place that we're in right now as a world. So nobody has the answers. So I love that the privilege you've given yourself to say, let me just explore, let me listen, let me hear, let me
Mhm.
learn. So, well,
Exactly
Sheryl,
that.
I want to just thank you. Um, we share so many experiences. Like listening to you talk is just like a mirror into my world. Both being children of the West Indian parents and our navigation of the corporate world and our even our personal experiences as kids growing up. So I really appreciate you being so honest and candid in this conversation. And I hope you'll come back because we need to continue the conversation. And I just want to tell my listeners, listen, look out for Sheryl. We'll have her coordinates when we post this on YouTube so that you too can reach out to this incredible woman and benefit from her expertise. So I just want to thank you again, Sheryl. It's great to have you on the sink.
Well, thank you, Nicole. And if I may, just providing a little bit of space to you and gratitude to you and your team for creating this space. It is so needed. It always has been needed, and even more so now is needed. So I want to thank you and your team for creating this space, creating the opportunity for voices to be heard. And quite frankly, speaking with you, having the conversation back and forth reminds me that I'm not alone in all of this.
Yeah,
So thank you.
oh, listen, she's being very kind because one of the inspirations behind this podcast is Sheryl. She's been talking about us doing this for years. So I owe a debt to you for just giving me the courage to jump into this. So right back at you, honey. So right back at you. So thanks again and see you on the sink.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sync podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Sync podcast is brought to you by Synclusiv, where we're building inclusive workplaces that work for everyone. To learn more about how Synclusiv can help your organization create real, measurable change, visit synclusiv.com. Until next time, stay in sync.